My name is Heiko Khoo. I'm a doctor of political economy, focused mainly on China. And I'm in Hyde Park at Speaker's Corner. There's not too many people around now. So I'm here to explain a little bit about the lies that we've been told over the last few weeks. Now, I did say I wouldn't come down to Hyde Park during the period of the crisis, but obviously there's not that many people around, and there are a number of issues connected with the whole subject of free speech that I'd like to address. And I've got in case anyone comes along and tries to stop me coming to Hyde Park, Speaker's Corner during this period, I've got my journalist's card on me so I can prove I'm doing my job. Now, the first thing I want to say is as follows. I just read Michael Gove's disgusting comments about China, where he claimed that the whole problem is really down to the Chinese. And the argument goes that in the first month, the Chinese, when they detected the virus and the whistleblower explained about what it was, that they were responsible for the world, and modelling has suggested, they say, that 95% of the cases could have been avoided had the Chinese reported or acted on their findings of a new SARS virus at the time. The problem with this argument is as follows. You know, you can complain all you like about the Chinese press, and I work for the Chinese media, and you can complain all you like about them, and I have my own complaints, believe you me, but this was all 2 months ago. The Chinese, we've known about this since the end of December, beginning of January, all around the world, and the total deaths in China are under 4,000. We just went over 1,000. And yesterday, the government's chief medical advisor, who was present at the meeting yesterday, wasn't Chris Whitty, because he's come down with the ailment that he told us he knew how you can avoid. They told us, all you have to do is wash your hands, sing happy birthday, and the transmissions will be minimal. And it's perfectly okay to carry on working. It's perfectly okay to get on the tube. It's perfectly okay to get on the bus. That's what they were saying until last week, what is it now? 8 days ago. Until 8 days ago. You can check on YouTube and you can check on my Facebook posts. I did a video 3 weeks ago here in Hyde Park. People coughed on me, people attacked me, people slandered me, people tried to prevent me from speaking. And in that video I explained they had to take dramatic action in order to prevent the spread of the virus. And they've avoided doing that. And because they avoided doing that until last week, that's why we're in the situation we're in. And yesterday, the chief advisor that they had the gall to turn around and say, it will be good if we have under 20,000. Now, we've already got 15 deaths per million. In China, the total deaths per million is less than 3. Less than 3. Yet we have 2 months advantage over the Chinese. In fact, more than that, because the virus wasn't here until January, as far as we know. And yet, the British government has already got 1,000 deaths and is talking about 20,000. Now, I think they're exaggerating about the 20,000. I hope they are exaggerating about 20,000. In fact, Ferguson from Imperial College, another one of these modelers, they've got a lot of modelers around. And the one thing they do in Britain is they like to con people into thinking that these modelers are somehow scientists. I mean, they may be scientists. I'm a scientist, yeah? Anyone who's got a doctor in front of their name can call themselves a scientist of some sort or other. But what does it mean in reality? It means we're dealing with a virological issue. That's one subject. And then you've got sociological questions, and they've been presenting right the way throughout this whole period They've been presenting behavioural science, which is marketing. It's got nothing to do with science per se. It's marketing theory. And their marketing theory has been imposed on us. Now, they say they're not sure how many people in the population are infected. Well, ask yourself this. How do they know during the Brexit campaign, during the general election, how do they know what the likely results are, plus or minus 2 or 3%? They know because they have opinion polls and they have surveying companies who are capable of judging and selecting from a representative sample of the population what the proportionate distribution will be, and they're pretty accurate. Now, why can't they do the same in terms of testing for COVID-19? Why can't they pick representative samples within each borough, within each city, and within the country in order to identify what the prevalence rate is for infection using the tests that are tests for presence of infection? So they would be able to do it. They could do this every few days. We'd have a representative. We'd know where we're at. And they have been concealing the information right throughout the period since this crisis began. They've been concealing the information from the population. And that is the most disgusting thing. And one of the most disgusting elements of this, or repulsive elements of this, is the subservient attitude of the mass media. You know, rather than asking a serious question, they ask a question and then it's brushed off. Oh, the scientific advisor can answer now, or the Professor so-and-so can answer now. And then once they answer, then of course the government gets away with it, and they get, and the officers then turn round. Some of them, like Patrick Whitty, I believe he was, to be honest, I think he's useless. He's absolutely useless. And the most clear evidence of this, look at the newspapers today. You see, you might think you're being told largely what's the truth by Boris Johnson. Of course, opinion polls are now showing Johnson's ratings are up. But the truth of the matter is, now they have control over the media, as in any wartime situation. And one of the aspects of what's going on is that all of us are being corralled into very limited ranges of people who, for example, our Facebook posts will connect to. So you'll be enclosed in a small group of people. The rest of the people won't see what you're even posting. And so in that way, the so-called social media that was supposed to liberate our capacity to communicate with each other has been turned into its opposites. It's been turned into a form of isolationism, interconnected in the most bizarre way with the present isolationism imposed by the British government on the basis of saying that COVID-19 is a serious, which of course it is a serious threat. But when they were told, they decided that they would adopt, we all know nowadays, the herd immunity theory. And so everyone would get infected, or lots of people get infected. You might protect some of the older people, but the rate of infection will go very high. There'll be quite a high death rate, but then eventually we'll be fine, because they feared there might be some future recurrence. Now, there were 3 scientific papers published a few days ago. One of them I'd like to point out to you because I think it's very important, and that's this one here. We've always heard a lot about climate over the years, and many people know I've got a bit of a maverick view on the question. But anyway, this is a map showing the world and the infection in the world, and you can notice that there's a band of infection in certain regions of the world. And those regions are in the areas where the temperature is about 5 to 11 degrees centigrade, and the humidity varies between about 3 and 6 grams per kilogram. Now, that's the main reason why countries, for example, like Thailand, which has a very poor health system, like Laos, like Vietnam, even though they have close connections to Wuhan, did not get large infection rates, even though they started out with a far higher number than we have in Britain. So now the question comes, why are we in Britain in such a catastrophic situation? And the answer lies in that the great Brexiteers, Dominic Cummings, Michael Gove, Boris Johnson, refused to implement health controls on the borders. That's the main reason why Britain is now in the catastrophe it is. And the other element to it is that once people did come in and they detected a few people, They didn't contact trace. They didn't continue checking up what was, where they've gone, who they've contacted, and so on. The South Koreans and the Japanese have managed to avoid large-scale lockdowns because the one thing the British government, again, refused to do, which put all our lives in jeopardy, was they refused to advocate the use of masks. And if you look at for example, on the BBC, you will see reports about masks. And they'll say, don't wear a mask. And the WHO actually is responsible for this partly as well. But there's a reason why the WHO has done this. And that's because the WHO said don't wear a mask because basically some countries don't have the masks and there'll be a panic and so on and so forth. But the problem is that the evidence from the countries where people do wear masks is overwhelming. I mean, Korea, China, Hong Kong, Singapore, South Korea that is, and Japan. In all those countries there is a culture, quite a long-standing culture actually, partly because of, for example, in China you got a lot of particulates in the air, but also because they had the SARS virus in 2003 and they had experience of this, and because of this they know that in wintertime, during the seasonal period of flu, the best idea is to wear a mask. And the reason for that is because if you're getting into certain environments, so in the open air like this, and I'll come on to the question about parks in a few minutes, the open air like this is a perfectly safe environment. There is no way you're going to get COVID-19 being in the park here, right? No way. Except if you've got a large group of people around you, for example, like a football match or, gatherings of, 10, 20 people or something like that. 2 meters, well, yes, it is possible to transmit up to 2 meters. In fact, more than 2 meters. It's possible to do up to 10 meters. There was a Chinese study where they observed people inside buses and they traced the people who had passed on the disease and traced the people who had caught the disease from that. And they found that it could transmit up to 10 meters in certain environments. You see, in order to survive, the virus, it gets transmitted into droplets in the air. So if I cough, the droplets go into the air which you can't see. Those droplets in a windy environment like this are dispersed extremely rapidly. Also sunshine weakens their efficacy. So for them to reach into somebody else's nasal passage, mouth, or in theory into their eyes, and therefore, because the eyes are connected to the nasal system, and therefore they could in theory go through the eyes, but the likelihood of transmission through the eyes is far lower. So first transmission route, cough. Second transmission route and ingestion route is through the mouth. Otherwise it can be through the nose. And sneezing can have the same effect, but sneezing probably less powerful because the injection of material from the chest is far greater if you're coughing. Now, then there was the question of the schools. In Japan, they closed the schools. See, one of the first things they did in Japan was to close the schools. And they found that the transmission rate drops a great deal if you close the schools. So this was a logistical problem again as to why the British didn't want to close the schools. Now there's the question about the parks. You may remember Boris Johnson came on television and he said, it's hard to keep track of the world. It's like one day merges into another. But in any case, if you do look through the timeline again, and you remember, it's like George Orwell, it came to mind on the way here, he who controls the past controls the present. He who controls the present controls the future. So we have to keep a track of what happened. And that's very important. In any dramatic changes in the world, you must keep track of what's happening so that you know what was said one day and how it's contradicted the next. So Boris Johnson turned around one day at one of these press conferences and he said, the national parks will be open to the whole of the population. And then they said, a few days after, they said, we're closing down the country, but you can go out to the parks and exercise. And then, of course, what happened was, particularly with people with children and so on, cooped up at home, and people thought, well, this is a chance to get some relaxation and escape from the terror of the telly, if you like, or the terror of the internet, of the everyday moments of watching the internet. George Magnus, I'll have a look at what you said in a second. Seasonal flu is spread over a longer period and less virulent. We must take COVID well, I'm not taking, you know, I tell you, check back on my timeline and you'll see I'm the first person who took this seriously, certainly in Hyde Park, and a lot of people noticed, you know, and the video I released, don't forget that, the video that we released, Double Down Media and myself, the video we released on the 12th of March was the same day the government changed their position, don't forget, from herd immunity to, you know, I don't think Dominic Cummings doesn't watch those things, because that's the main media channel that was connected with Jeremy Corbyn. You know, these filmmakers were the filmmakers for Jeremy Corbyn. So it's not true to say that I'm underestimating COVID-19. I warned them in advance as to what would happen. And of course, most people, because of the way the government approached the question, they wanted the herd immunity. They didn't think we'd ask questions. They thought we're too bloody stupid. And Boris Johnson turned around and said, well, you know, he said, go to the parks, go to the national parks because they're all free. You know, why you make them free if you don't want people to go there? Then people went there, and then there was this sneaky behavioural manipulation campaign, no doubt orchestrated by Dominic Cummings, because he wanted to save his arse. People were probably, you know, in the Conservative Party, knives are out, you know, they're waiting for their chance. Don't forget, Michael Gove was the guy who stopped Boris Johnson standing in the election when Theresa May won, you know. Boris Johnson was supposed to be the great white hope at that time, you know. Now he's landed the job in the worst possible time. Now, Boris Johnson then turned around and said, go to the parks. So people went to the parks, and then the newspapers, those agents of the Conservative establishment and the liberal elite, they turned around and said, my God, there are people in the park, you know. Now you had these policemen flying around with drones across the bloody Yorkshire Dales. They got nothing better to do. Across the Yorkshire Dales, monitoring a couple of people with a dog in the Yorkshire Dales, and we're supposed to be worried about that. At the same time, you got packed tube trains, only last Friday, packed tube trains, because the bosses in a lot of companies still want to make their money. My landlord wrote me a letter the other day, very nice email. Hope you're all keeping well under the period of COVID-19, but don't get the idea you can't pay your rent. That's what they said. Don't get any ideas in your head you can't pay your rent. I got a phone call from others this morning, so-called guardians, getting threatened about not paying their rent. And then you try and apply for whatever type of credit, tax credit or a universal credit or whatever it is, and there's hundreds of thousands of people before you, and then the machines crash when you're using it. So the idea that they're looking to know what they're doing, they don't have a clue what they're doing. That's the truth of the matter. And they're meandering from one side to another, probably in a balance of forces inside the cabinet. You know, there's this SAGE committee, and there was the people advising Dominic Cummings, who published an article, by the way, in the got an article published a week or so ago, not peer-reviewed, and then they managed to get through a marketing company, they managed to get it published in the Financial Times, the number one, if you like, serious newspaper in Britain, particularly interested for business interests. And this newspaper, this article was from Oxford University, and these Oxford University guys, they turned around and said, well, 500, half the population are already infected. That was their latest scam. Half the population are infected. So, you see, we're left in the dark with all this sort of wild guesses about the number of people who are supposed to be infected. Well, if we're supposed to be, you know, we're supposed to have these great scientists, surely, as I said earlier on, they can take a representative sample of population groups, school kids, people in different areas of London. They can easily, they've got opinion poll companies coming out of your backside in Britain, and they're pretty good at judging opinion, and therefore they're pretty good in judging different social composition of different groups, so they can do tests at the level that check the general infection rate in the population. And this half the population story, I've no doubt that Cummings was behind it, was behind promoting this story, because it again ramped up his theory that, oh, there's already herd immunity. And all this began, you see, we discovered this whole thing because it was a slip of the tongue by Professor Whitty. Professor Whitty said on the 5th of March at the House of Commons the Health and Social Care Committee. He said that the amount of people infected in Wuhan was 20% of the population. He was asked by Jeremy Hunt, who was chairing the meeting, and then he coughed. And then, by the way, Chris Whitty coughed the number. You can see it on YouTube. He coughed the number of times into the open air and into his own hand. So so much for his meticulous adherence to the right behaviour to prevent the spread of the disease. Now, what else did I want to say? Well, I mean, the idea that we have to be locked up in our individual houses, again, is contradicted by this. You see, until a couple of days ago, every supermarket where I am, and I'm sure that's and I've only gone to local supermarkets. I haven't gone to once or twice went to big ones. They were packed out, and the staff in the supermarkets get no protection. They get no training in protection. Many of the NHS staff have got no training, and they're still being told not to wear masks. Now, in Korea, in Japan, they wear masks, and that's what prevented. Their numbers would be like ours had they not been wearing masks, getting on when they get on the tubes, when they get on the buses, and they enter environments where infection can take place, and where the spread of the virus in the cough droplets, or even can turn aerosolized, can become smaller than 5 microns, become aerosolized, and hang in the air for longer, inside enclosed environments. But you see, these people, I don't know what it is. They seem to think that, you can just denigrate the Asians. You can make, they're so different. They're not like us. They like their nanny state. They like being told what to do. They're very subservient. And yet, unfortunately, you go to as I said, you go to the supermarket and, it's been pathetic. I mean, I've gone in there with masks. People are going, what's the matter with him? Why's he got a mask on? What's the matter with him? He's got a mask on. Look, what's the matter with him? They think you're infected because you've got a mask on. You're trying to prevent other people being... If I was infected, I could pass it on if I didn't have a mask on. And it's a mutual respect to do that. And had we been wearing masks 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, they could have just said, we think it's a good idea to wear a mask. And if you don't have a mask, please put something in front of your mouth. Then you can't touch your mouth, you can't touch your nose. So that'll stop you doing what your biology as a human being has compelled you to do for the last 200 million years of mammalian existence, which the government seemed to think was possible to change by nudging you to change your behaviour, that is ingrained in the mammalian species. Somehow they thought they could do that, but they couldn't ask people to wear masks. I mean, who are these lunatics? They are just nutcases. Well, I say they're nutcases. They're utterly incompetent for dealing with any serious situation. And that was what we saw with the Brexit vote, with discussions around these questions. They were incapable of dealing with any serious questions. And then now we have a really serious question, and here we have the disaster all around us, 1,000 deaths already. 1,000 deaths already. The Chinese mobilized, why did they do it? Why did they do all they did? For us to fuck it up, to spread disease all around the world. Airplanes arriving full of people who've got the disease, airplanes leaving full of people who've got the disease, no checks on people getting on the tube, no checks in the tube stations, the poor. And now they're sending out, this is I'll end on this piece, it's just a bloody joke, isn't it? Boris Johnson, the newspapers, they were saying today, some of our leaders, our government has some of our leaders have come down with the virus. It says like other governments. No. No other government, no other prime minister has caught the virus. So what did you do wrong to get it? Why did you get it? What was your mistake in your behaviour that led you to get it? And not only you to get it, but Patrick Whitty to get it, the health secretary to get it. Now, the fact of the matter is, according to the studies that have been done, one person infected, undetected, passes it on in 8 weeks to about 3,000 people, results in about 15 deaths. So, it's not a joke that these people have been wandering around, You know, oh, take it on the chin. Take it on the chin, like a strong man, you know, like some public schoolboy twat who wants to tell you how to behave. Now, one final point is this. Now, when he's sat in bed, Dominic Cummings comes to him and says, well, I've got a good idea. You know, you've got a bit of a sympathy vote now. So what you need to do now is write a personal letter to everybody. So I guess he's writing this letter out, and then he's licking the envelopes, 30 million of them. So then they send the envelopes out. And I posted this afternoon, I said, 30 million envelopes, letters to the British population. So what does it mean? The logistics of organising, I know the post is already there, but it's an additional 30 million letters. The logistics of organising to get the paper, to print the letters, to put them in the envelopes, to distribute them to distribution centre, to put stamps or franking on them, to send them out to the population, to deliver them to the doors, for the people to go into the corridor, which may be shared, like my place is shared with others, to go and pick up the letter, to open the letter. What if 1 in every 300 posties has got the virus and is going, as they cough, as they carry their bag? Every single one of their letters every single one of that 1 in 300 posties might cough and get some of the disease or some of the virus on the letters. It can survive a while on a letter. Someone just posted something earlier on, a friend of mine, Mladen, hello Mladen in Serbia, and on, you know, it's true that it can last quite a time under laboratory conditions, but under conditions like that, you know, and then letter goes in. Now my postie only started wearing gloves 2 days ago. He still isn't wearing a mask. Yeah? The delivery drivers, most of them aren't wearing masks. The guys on the road sweepers aren't wearing masks. The people in the supermarket aren't wearing masks. What sort of madhouse is this? Masks, I repeat again, will protect you from, or will stop you from spreading the disease yourself. That's the primary thing, because the government has allowed the virus to spread uncontrolled in the population up until a week ago, and then now they're trying to blame us. They're trying to blame us. Your kids had a barbecue with 20 people. They had the frigging Cheltenham Festival a couple of days ago. They allowed that to go ahead. They had the game with Madrid. They allowed that to go ahead. Hundreds of thousands of people could have been infected as a result of those two events. And then we're supposed to oh my God, there's a house party with 5 people. You know, someone visited their boyfriend or their girlfriend. These bloody crooks, that's what they are, crooks. So I'll try and keep regular updates either at Speaker's Corner or elsewhere. Hopefully we can also use this as a mechanism for ensuring that people realise that we can't just agree to obey every single regulation and rule that they impose. At a certain point, don't forget these are draconian dictatorial rules they're installing. Now, to some degree, and I was in favour of those rules long before they introduced them, but not the particularities of what they're doing. The primary question is focus, concentration. What are the central nodes of transmission? Those are the nodes they should have hit first. Schools, tubes, buses, large workplaces, college, student halls of residence, which are just the same as ships. Ships used to be historically the transmission centre for infectious diseases. In any case, that's Heiko Khoo at Speaker's Corner signing off on this sunny, cold day. Ideal conditions for spreading the virus, and quite an empty park, it must be said. But that's not a good thing. Think of the mental health of the people. If they're all now scared to go out, it's going to cause enormous mental strain and disorder in society. A lot of arguments, conflicts, suicides, and so on. So look out for your neighbours. Look out for your friends and family. Solidarity, not only to you, but to the whole world facing this crisis. Thanks very much.